about that. So enough housekeeping and on to Erica. As I said before, this is the third time we've gotten her and we've got her, so that's great. She's the author of both nonfiction and fiction. She'll be talking specifically about her memoir, House Lessons, and also her newest novel, The Scent Keeper. She's written several other novels. The School of Essential Ingredients, I think, was the first one. The Lost Art of Mixing, Joy for Beginners, and she's also the co-author of two anthologies, 500 Great Books written by women, and then Let's Hear It for the Girls, which is for readers, I think, is it 12 to 14 or 10 to 14, something like that. 14. Sorry, way off.
Much younger.
So anyway, I hope you all have read her stuff. I certainly read House Lessons and thoroughly enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to your presentation. So Erica, I'm going to let you take off with this, and I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and turn off my video too.
All righty then. Could you leave me in the black? Okay, so hi everybody, and thank you again. I wish I was with you in person, but we will do that sometime, I promise. I love the San Juans. It's where we took a bicycle trip there on my honeymoon and fell in love with it and have been back many times and can't wait to be there in person. The islands are incredibly important to me. They were inspirational when I was going to write Scent Keeper. I knew that I wanted that kind of island feeling. I ended up finding islands that were a little further north, the Broughton Archipelago. I needed to have places that were a little more uninhabited than y'all have. But I think that general feeling of islands themselves really came from those early visits to the San Juans. So, Scent Keeper is kind of for you all, and House Lessons, which is the memoir we're going to talk about tonight, that is really for you all too, because we are all stuck at home right now, and I did not intend to time this book quite so appropriately for a time when people were housebound and thinking about how they could make their houses better and work more for them during this period of time. But there we are. Sometimes, I don't know that I'd call it lucky, but sometimes it's appropriate timing. So anyway, I want to start out by thanking Boyd and the San Juan Library, thanking Griffin Bay, thanking Darville's. Independent bookstores are the lifeblood of our communities. They are the lifeblood of authors, particularly those like me. We call ourselves the proud mid-list. We're the people that the independent bookstores tell you about. You're not going to find us necessarily through the algorithm on the big internet companies. We're the ones that are hand sold, and without those independent bookstores, we would not be here. And so please support them, Griffin Bay and Darville's. I've sent signed book plates to both of them, so you can get books that are signed through them. If you want them personalized, you can contact me through my website, buy the book from them. I'll send you a personalized book plate straight to your mailbox. So that works out as well. Anyway, that's my housekeeping. Let me start into House Lessons. One of you nicely held up the book before, but we'll hold it up again. House Lessons is a book that I started long before I ever wrote novels. The book is about events that started in 2001. And back in 2001, I was still an author who was trying to get memoirs published. I had written a memoir about it being a young mother. I'd written one about living in Italy. Neither of them were published. I wrote the first version of House Lessons back in 2001, 2002. And the feedback that I was getting at that time on those memoirs, which were all very important because I was learning my craft while I was writing them, but they kept getting rejected. Many boxes of rejections. And one of the things that happened was that the feedback I was getting was that my memoirs weren't personal enough. And the irony is that when I switched to fiction, which happened, my first fiction novel was published in 2009, right before my 50th birthday. But when I switched to writing a novel and I wrote The School of Essential Ingredients, what I learned was I could tell better truth through lying, through fiction. That is what taught me how to be personal, how to go there, how to be comfortable with going there. And so School of Essential Ingredients was the book that taught me through other characters. None of those characters are me. And yet each of those characters was a door into being a truer version of myself. And that happened again with Joy for Beginners, and again with The Lost Art of Mixing, and even with Scent Keeper. And as I was finishing up Scent Keeper, something else happened, which is that I started thinking a lot about scent and perfume. I was doing a lot of research for that book. And one of the things that I started thinking about is how perfume, you may or may not know this, we're not all big perfume wearers these days, but perfume comes in 3 levels of notes. There's top notes, middle notes, and base notes. Now the top notes are the sparkly ones. Those are the ones that you smell first. If you get a hit of perfume, those bright, the citrus notes, the champagne notes, the grassy notes, those ones that really pull you in, those are the top notes. And the middle notes are what they call the heart notes. And they're a little softer, they're a little rounder, they last longer. And those are your roses, and they tend to be more flower based. And then the third level is the base notes. And those are the notes that really come on about 45 minutes to an hour in. And those, I always call them the sex and death notes, because that's where these notes come from. They come from musk, they come from fungus, they come from strange places. And yet a little bit of them you need, because they are this universal base that really holds the perfume together. Which is why if you're ever going to try perfume, you need to spray it on and walk around for at least 2 or 3 hours before you buy it, to make sure that you like it all the way through all 3 levels. Now, you might think, what the heck does that have to do with a memoir about houses? And here's how it does. I think every good memoir, and every good fiction book as well, has 3 levels. There are those top notes, which are the anecdotes. It's what happened. And then there's the middle notes, which is the lessons that in fiction the character learned, but in a memoir, it's the lessons that the author learned. The base level are the universal things, the universal themes in a novel, and the universal lessons that a reader can take away from a memoir. Which is why you can read a book like Wild, Cheryl Strayed's book. And even though you might never plan on hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, you still can get a lot from that book. You'll get a lot from the anecdotes, you'll get a lot from what she learned, but you're also, as a reader, you're going to learn about grief, about identity, about these things that we all experience, whether or not we ever put on hiking boots. And that's the brilliance of a really good memoir. And I think the reason why I am so glad that it took me 15 years to write House Lessons is that the first time I wrote it, I think I nailed the top notes. And the second time I wrote it, I got to the middle notes. But it was 15 years after the events happened that I got to the base notes, to those universal notes. And one of the things that spurred me on was reading an interview with Cheryl Strayed, who said she never would have written the book she wrote, Wild, if she had written it right when it happened. She said, I waited 15 years. And I thought, ha ha, I'm at 15 years. This is perfect. And so I went back, and what had been a straight chronological memoir turned into a memoir in essays. And it is also coming from 3 different sides. So it's coming from the stories of the renovation. House that we bought in 2001 in Port Townsend, a wreck of a house filled with trash. And then, so there's all the strangeness of that. The rats, the trash, the problems, the almost fires, all of the things that happen, hopefully not to you, but happened to us during the renovation. And then there's the middle notes, the personal part of it, which is that this was during a time in my life when we were going through a lot of upheaval, and we were figuring out, what are we going to do with our marriage? What are we going to do with our kids? Our kids were 10 and 13. We were hitting that teenage years with our daughter, and she and I were at loggerheads. And the book is about figuring out how to renovate relationships. And then at that more universal level, this is a book about houses and how the houses we live in affect who we are, simply by the design and layout of the building we live in, we become different people. And I found that fascinating because one of the other things that I was doing during those 15 years when I was writing novels, I was also researching about houses and architectural theory and the psychology of space and all of those wonderful things. And that all came to play in the book itself. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to read to you the intro to give you just a little bit of an understanding of what we walked into. We did not intend to buy this house, by the way. We didn't intend to buy a house at all. We were looking for land. We had gone out to the Olympic Peninsula. My husband, in an effort to divert my extra energy at the time, was saying, let's buy a simple piece of land. Later on, when the kids graduate from college, we can build a house, we can retire out there. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be simple? What happened was, every time we'd go out to look for land, we'd drag the children along and they would get bored and we would say, okay, hang in there, we'll take you for pizza in Port Townsend. And each time we'd go to Port Townsend, we'd spend more time in Port Townsend and less time tromping around land out in the outskirts. And so then what happened was we started driving around town. We got past the pizza joint and we started driving around town and we started falling in love with these houses. And then one day we drove up a hill and this is what we found. The house stood at the top of a hill, ensnarled in vegetation, looking out over the Victorian roofs of Port Townsend and beyond to water and islands and clouds. It seemed to lean toward the view as if enchanted, although we later learned that had far more to do with neglect than magic. The once elegant slopes of its hipped roof rolled and curled green with moss. The tall straight walls of its four-square design were camouflaged in salmon pink asbestos shingles, the windows covered in grimy curtains. 3 discarded furnaces, 4 neon yellow oil drums, an ancient camper shell, and a pair of rusted wheelbarrows lay scattered at odd angles across the overgrown grass as if caught in a game of large appliance freeze tag. The garden was Darwinian in its landscaping, an agglomeration of plants and trees stuck in the ground and left to survive. In front, 2 weather-stunted palm trees flanked the walkway like a pair of tropical lawn jockeys gone lost, while a feral camellia bush had covered the porch and was heading for the second story. Someone hacked away a rough opening for the front stairs, down which an assortment of rusted rakes and car part mufflers and bags of fertilizer sprawled in lazy abandon. In their midst, seemingly oblivious to its setting, sat a rotting fruit basket, gift cards still attached. That one, my husband said as he pointed to the house. It's not for sale, I noted. I know, but it should be, don't you think? Our son and daughter, 10 and 13, stared out the window, slack-jawed. You're kidding, right? The kids asked. But I think they already knew. The question was rhetorical. Now, one of the fun things about doing this virtually is that I get to show you pictures. So we are going to make a somewhat desperate attempt to share screens here. So Boyd may have to come on and tell me that I've done this right, because otherwise I may not know, but we're going for it anyway. Here we go. All right. I'm hoping we're good. So this is the house as it was in 1909 when it was first built, ever so long ago. And let me see if I can, yep. And this is the house that we found in 2001. That's the inspector up on the roof. And you can sort of see that camellia bush that's going with my cursor. You can see the camellia bush that's covering it all up. Now this I threw in just for fun because one of the things we had to do was lift the house up off the ground. The foundation was shot. There was a 3-foot long diagonal crack that was about, I don't know, half an inch wide. The joke always is if you can stick your checkbook in a crack, you should just leave it there, which is pretty much what we did. You can also see our little weather-stunted palm trees right there. This was the front porch. That's our son. This gives you an idea of the level of trash. And this is the front porch once we were done with it. You can see the view, which is one of the other reasons to buy the house. And then here's the house as we were, this is actually last winter. So now in the book, it talks about why I fell in love with the house. And one of the reasons is this little thing right here. This is called a corbel, and it's a flourish. It's just an architectural flourish. It is unnecessary. It is just there to be pretty. And for some reason, that thing up there above all that trash, I don't know, I fell in love with it. So here's the kitchen. We're inside now, obviously. It was so completely sodden with grease and leaked water from the roof that we actually just cut it off the side of the house. So that's us cutting it off. My husband went up there with a chainsaw and just took it off the side of the house. But that left us with a problem because we didn't have a kitchen. So this is the dining room. You're looking from the living room into the dining room, and you can actually, this was the door to the kitchen, which had at one point been a butler's pantry. And what you can't really see is off to the side here was a sideboard. And behind this wall was another room that we called the yuck room, because that's what was in that room. There was over a ton of trash in that room alone. The problem was, here we are, here's our dining room, we've cut off the kitchen. So where are we going to put the kitchen, the new kitchen? And the idea was, and our architect was brilliant, he said, let's put it in the yuck room. And I said, that's an awful idea. The yuck room is scary and terrible and dark. And he said, let's open up the wall. And so that's what we did. And there's the kitchen. And this is what it looks like now. So this used to be the old kitchen. When we moved out here permanently in 2012, we added a sunroom on where the old kitchen used to be. And here is the new kitchen. And one of the lovely things about it is it allows you to have communication between the kitchen and the dining room. It means we only have one table. We don't need a kitchen table. I wanted what I called a 4-butt kitchen. I wanted to change how I cooked. I wanted to invite people into my kitchen. We'd always had oddly shaped kitchens. And I really, when any design change we made in this house, for me, it was really important that it modify my behavior in a way I wanted it to happen. And so we were very intentional about these things. And so I wanted a 4-butt kitchen so that 4 people could cook in the kitchen at one time and never bang butts. And that's what we got. And honest to God, it made a difference. This was the living room. And you can see there was the old, big, old, awful chimney. Well, the chimney on the outside was gorgeous. The fireplace on the inside was not. And we took it out and instead put in the French doors, which allows the light to come in. We couldn't afford to recreate the chimney. And this gives you an idea. One of the other things that we did was, it was originally the living room had been this big room. They had taken out the main stairway. There was a tiny servant staircase in the back. And our architect was brilliant. He took out what had been solid walls that had French doors that pulled back into them and made them half open. And then he also added these partway through the living room. Now you would think that that would make for a much smaller room, which it did. But what happened was it gave us an entryway and we put the staircase back in. And even though the living room is smaller, you feel like you are in a living room instead of a roller skating rink, which is kind of how it felt in the beginning. And putting these stairs back in, which they had taken out apparently because they wanted more room for their Christmas tree, but we put them back in. And it gives you this lovely feeling of graciousness and welcome. And halfway up the stairs, there is now one of my favorite little bits in the house, which is a reading nook. That's where I imagine my granddaughter sitting in a couple of years, right up there, halfway up the stairs. I wanted to include this one just because this is a book about a marriage, and my husband is an artist as well as a software guy. He's not a big reader. And so when I gave him the copy of the manuscript and said, you really should read this one because you're in it, his response was to make me a house out of the book, because I had made a book out of the house. And this is our house. And that's our view. And now I'm going to see if I can get back to the screen. Yes, there. Hopefully we are all there. And thank you for the nice comment about my kitchen. Thank you. Anyway, so that gives you some insight into the house. But what I also want to do, I'm going to spend just a couple minutes. I want to read from the beginning of the book, because I think that part is where we get into the universal, and I think that that part is important. The first chapter is called Falling in Love, and it opens with a quote that says, "Buyers are liars," written by every real estate ever. I did real estate agent ever. I did real estate for 5 years after we finished this house, and I can tell you that that quote is absolutely true, and no real estate agent will ever tell it to your face. And I'm going to tell you why buyers are liars. Any honest real estate agent will tell you that most home buyers' decisions are no more rational than my mother's was when she used to buy our Christmas tree and take us to lot after lot after lot and never make up her mind until she found the one that talked to her. There was a time in my life, years after I first encountered that ramshackle house in Port Townsend, when I was an agent myself, walking buyers through the process and dutifully helping them draw up their lists of requirements. I would listen to a couple emphatically assert that they needed 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, and a no-maintenance yard, and then watch as they fell in love with a tiny, garden-becalmed cottage that they spotted on the way to the house that met every one of their specifications. It happened over and over and over again. While we might like to believe that our house needs are pragmatic line items, our true needs, the ones that drive our decisions, come far more often from deep and unacknowledged well springs of memories and desires. Because here's the thing, we aren't looking for a house, we're looking for a home. A house can supply you with a place to sleep, to cook, to store your car. A home fits your soul. In ancient Rome, the term domus, from which we get the word domicile, meant both people and place, an unspoken relationship that we feel like a heartbeat. A home fulfills needs you didn't know you had. So it's no wonder that when pressed for an explanation for our choices, we give reasons that make no sense, pointing to a bunch of dried lavender hanging in the kitchen, a porch swing, the blue of a front door, almost always things that could be recreated in a house that fit the list. But sense is not the point. These small details are simply visual reminders of an architectural personality that fits our own, that reminds us of a childhood home or a house filled with joy and color and the laughter of children that we visited on a vacation in Mexico. And yet a choice of a house is not just about where we've been or what we remember. It's also about who we want to be. As Winston Churchill famously said, we shape our buildings and afterwards they shape us. When we choose a house, we are making a decision about how we will live. I don't mean in the obvious way of how long your commute to work will be, or whether there are schools or stores or friends nearby, although all of those things are important and will impact your life. What I'm talking about is something far more subliminal. The designs of our homes quite literally change us. An eating nook for 2 invites a busy couple to slow down every morning for coffee. A courtyard in an apartment building helps create community. A south-facing window encourages optimism, while alcoves foster book lovers. Perhaps one of the strongest blows for feminism came from the first sledgehammer that opened a kitchen to a family room and changed the view of the cook from both sides of the wall. It is the rare buyer who sees these things for what they are. We are understandably distracted by the stress of what is, for many of us, the biggest financial decisions of our lives. Our minds are busy, but we feel those subtle calls. we see that lavender, and as often as not, we leap. So one of the other things I wanted to bring up when I was showing you the slides, that whole idea of houses shaping us and us shaping them. You know, I talked about it with the kitchen, but it was also very important in terms of why we chose a 4-square house to begin with. I'm a very shy person. I'm a very introverted person. I would really love to be a more social person. That would make me happy. But the problem is, if I'm in a huge big room, I'm discombobulated. I don't know where to go. I kind of back up against the wall and I instantly turn into a wallflower. A 4-square house, and you saw how a 4-square house has one room leading to the next, leading to the next, leading to the next, each one through these kind of partial openings. And what it does is it both creates a series of views that lead you through the house, but it also leads you with a myriad of safe places to be. It's like a series of window seats. One of the reasons why people love window seats is they give us both what they call prospect and refuge. So both the view and the way to be safe. And for a shy person to have a house that allows you to, both encourages you to go through the house and mingle and see other people, doesn't trap you in any one room, and yet it also makes you constantly feel as if the house has your back. And it is not, I think, coincidental that I have become a far more social person. We throw a lot more social gatherings in this house than I ever used to in our other ones. One of the things I'd love to, when we open this up for all the questions later, and we will do that in a couple minutes. I think Boyd has some questions first. But you know, it's kind of fun if any of you have issues that you're trying to figure out how to work with in your house, we can do that. Because I do think that right now, while very few of us have the money or the ability to have contractors coming into our houses, we have needs, we have things we'd like to change. And there are a lot of less expensive things that you can do that can take advantage of some solid architectural principles that can make your houses better. So at this point, if Boyd is around, I would love to invite him back. I know he's got some questions he wanted to ask. So
Great. Thank you, Erica. And I will open it up very soon, but I do have one first question. That is that I'm struck by the juxtaposition between nonfiction and fiction, and that you are able to handle both very well and very eloquently. But I'm curious about how space and the notion of space and as setting character and things like that works in your novels, and vice versa. You talk in your memoir a lot about stories, that you and your husband are story people, and and certainly the memoir is full of them. But how do you see that kind of narrative, the fictional narrative, and time working in regard to the memoir?
Good question. You know, I think it's interesting. When I came up with the idea for School of Essential Ingredients, and I had not thought I was going to be a fiction writer. I had lived my whole life unable to come up with a fictional character. I had tried, and they were always kind of thinly veiled portraits of my sisters and not very nice. And I didn't want to write that kind of book. I just didn't. I know people that do it really well, but I didn't want to do it that way. So I always said that if I couldn't come up with characters that were people that I had never met, I didn't want to write fiction. And that day that I went to the cooking class and we killed crabs with our bare hands, I was so shocked by the experience. And I remember standing there thinking, okay, what would it be like if you took 8 people and you had it in a cooking class that continued? You know, the crab class was a one-off. But what if you kept these people together? And this idea fell into my head. Each character would have a story. Each character would have the food that would take them to the next place in their life. And as soon as I had that, and the image that I equated with that was building a house. I had built a house for these characters. And I assumed that they would move in. And they did. They started showing up at 2 in the morning as I'm walking around a lake. People I have never met before. And they were lovely. I fell in love with these people. And I adored spending time with them. But my first three novels were actually what I would call interconnected short stories. And to me, it's a very architectural structure. It's like a series of rooms. You're going through them. And when I switched to Scent Keeper, which follows one character, it's a narrative arc that goes all the way through. I don't think it's coincidental that it's because I moved to a house where you go from room to room to room, like chapters. They're each a chapter in the larger book. And before that, I had lived in a house that did not have that narrative flow. It was very disconnected. And I really think that the places I was living in influenced the structure that I used for the book. Wow. Which is a roundabout way of answering your question. I'm not even sure if I answered it dead on, but it is really true. And I hadn't thought about that in a long time. So thank you.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful. And so enough about my asking questions. At this point, I'd like to ask if anybody else has questions. And again, you can do this. I'm going to check the chat thing, and I see 2 comments, no questions so far. But if anybody wants to raise their hand, their virtual hand, or they can turn on their video and wave at me, or I'll keep on looking for questions. And if you guys don't ask questions, I have some more, so. Well, everybody's being very polite and quiet.
I see a hand.
Okay, David, you're wanting to.
I love your comment about the school of essential ingredients being a series of interconnected short stories, and now this book being a series of essays. Mm-hmm. And I loved the school of essential ingredients, and your reading tonight gets back to that, and it has that same feel to it. So I'm wondering if you could speak more about that connection between doing it that way and how that came to you.
Doing it in terms of interconnected short stories, or doing memoir versus fiction?
Both.
Okay.
Both the interconnected short stories and then the essays.
Mm-hmm. So I think that writing interconnected short stories really, the other thing that was influencing me deeply back in that time was that I had 2 little kids, or 2 teenagers, and I had a full-time job. And so I didn't have the bandwidth or the time or the focus to be able to follow a book, one character, front to back. And I think that's why it is not at all, coincidental that The Scent Keeper, which is my one book that goes all the way through, was written after both of my kids graduated from college. We moved out to Port Townsend. I was in a place where I was a dedicated writer. So the interconnected idea fit the person I was at the time, which is someone that would get these short spurts of writing in between real estate clients, in between carpools, you name it. But it was these little bursts. And the other thing that was interesting about writing them was that I wrote them all at the same time. I didn't write the first one and then go to the next one and then go to the next one. I would start with one character and get part of it done, and then I go to another character and go to another character. I did the same thing with the essays for house lessons. I would work on one and then I'd work on another and kind of flesh them out. And they kind of all were growing up together. And then I would start to see the interconnections and how that would work. But it also meant that depending on what mood I was in, I could go spend time with that character. So if I was reflective and slightly sad, I would hang out with Tom. If I was a little grumpier, I would hang out with Chloe. And the same thing with writing house lessons. I had to be in a very particular mood to write the chapters about the time that our house in Seattle almost burned down, for example. I needed to be in a quieter, more compassionate space, but also be able to tap into the absolute panic and fear and anger I had in that situation as well. And so I could find my way in. And I love that. I love being able to shift between them. It would be very disconcerting for a lot of writers. I know a lot of writers who really like outlines and want to go in line. My brain, and you can tell when you read House Lessons, I like to draw connections. I like to see, how the personal fits the philosophical. And so when I made the switch to making them essays instead of a chronological narrative, it just blew open. It was so much fun.
So I have there's a technical question here from Shannon. You mentioned a book plate. You mind, Erica, just describing that process again?
Oh yeah, so book plates are just, how, gosh, when we were growing up, you would get a little, it was like a little piece of paper with a sticky on the back, and you could put it in and say, this book belongs to X person. And it's just like that. And so what you get is this little thing, it's about that big. And I just write you a note on it and sign my name. I know that both Griffin Bay and Darville's has, I don't know, 10 or 20 of them. And so you can easily get one that has a note from me, and it won't be addressed to you, but it's a note from me with my signature on it. It would come with the book. If you want one that's personalized to your name, you can find me through my website, and I can send you one to your snail mail. And I would love to, because it's really hard not to be with you and not to sign your books in person. It drives me nuts.
So Erica, I have a question from Pamela Gross. Did you take creative writing classes? Have you always been a writer?
No and yes. So I got a PhD in literature because I grew up in a family where you had to be serious by God. And so I'm kind of like John Irving had a character in The World According to Garp who went to graduate school. He went to school until he gradually learned he didn't have to go to school anymore. I was kind of like that, but I got all the way through the PhD first. And I got out the other side, and I knew I didn't, I love researching. I love thinking intellectual thoughts. I did not love being an academic. I didn't like the critical kind of rip it apart nature of that. I really, really wanted to use the skills that I had to offer people information and not to rip books apart. And so that was where 500 Great Books by Women came from, and Let's Hear It for the Girls. I wanted to offer resources to people to find other books. And then, I do the same thing. Every book I write is so chock full of research, it's ridiculous. It's either about cooking, or it's about perfume and scent branding, or it's about how to raft down the Grand Canyon. I go down one rabbit hole after another, and then I try to make it all streamlined and poetic and beautiful so that you get the information without slogging your way through it.
I don't see any more right now, so I'm going to ask you a question, and then I do see another one. So, but let me ask you this. Erica, you've written a lot about cooking, and I'm curious about cooking and writing. Are they similar?
Yes, they are. They really are. One of the things that I did when I was writing School of Essential Ingredients was, and Lost Art of Mixing, which is the sequel to the School of Essential Ingredients, I would, if I was ever stuck on a chapter, I would go and make the recipe that's at the heart of that story. And so we ate a lot of risotto, we made a lot of pasta, there's all that stuff going on. And again, it's research. I probably spent 6 months researching how to bake cakes because I'm a terrible cake baker. And I knew that there was a cake in one of the stories, so I had to do that. And when it came to Scent Keeper, the amount of research I did for that book was just extraordinary. And the fact that as I started writing it, I had wanted to write that book for a long time. And literally the weekend I started writing that novel, we were backpacking on the West Coast Trail of Vancouver Island, and it was a rainy night, and the bear spray went off in the tent by accident, and I inhaled and lost my sense of smell. So I spent a lot of time while I was researching the Scent Keeper doing all the things that you try to do to get your sense of smell back. Which meant really, I would get essential oils with a single scent. I'd put a drop on my wrist, and I kept a smell journal where every day I would track how I reacted to that smell. how it changed my mood, what that smell would be like if it was music, if it was a voice, if it was weather, if it was movement, any of those things, you know. And so for me, I love books that that dive deep and are about character, but also teach me something new. And so, and also all my books are about the subliminal things we aren't paying attention to. So how the food we're eating is affecting the meal we're having, how the house we're living in is affecting who we are on a daily basis. I love having readers pay attention to those things. I love the letters I get from readers that say, I never thought of that before. Now I'm paying attention. Like the comment in the chat box about how now all of a sudden a person is drying flowers and making smell boxes. Yes, makes my day.
That's great.
So
I see Alice and Ed are unmuted, but I'm going to go to Madeline because she was here first, and I'm going to ask her to unmute. And there you go.
okay, thanks. I'm going to go back to houses, and I'm intrigued, and you have invited me to reflect on how we shape houses and houses shape us. And it occurs to me that not only does the house shape us, but the context in which it's located. We've lived in two old historic homes in urban historic neighborhoods, and now live in a brand new contemporary home on the south end of San Juan Island. And those locations, as well as the house itself, shapes me in some intriguing ways. And I don't have more to say, just thanks for the invitation to reflect on that.
Yeah, and I do think that anytime that we think our house ends at the walls, again, we're not paying attention to the subliminal, all the subliminal things.
Well, some houses and locations keep us inside in crowded urban areas, and in a beautiful place like South San Juan Island, my house now draws me into the outdoors. Yeah. So it's about the house, but it's about the location and the neighborhood and the people who surround you in that place.
Mm-hmm. So actually, you talk about a house that draws and the environment that draws you outside, but that's one of those things. It's tangentially related to what you were just talking about, which is that I think one of the things right now with the coronavirus is that, you know, we need to be outside. You know, we need to give ourselves a break from being inside, but it can be really easy to get stuck inside our walls. And houses can, if they're designed correctly, offer you an invitation to go outside. So I showed you that picture of where we took out the chimney and now they're French doors. Those French doors say, come outside, let's go. And, you know, ideally those French doors would lead you right out to a garden, right? And there it is. It's a visual reminder every time you pass it, hey, why don't you go outside? You know, why don't you put down that computer screen, walk outside? Now, most of us don't have the time or the resources or the contractor to put French doors in our houses right now. That's a pretty big deal. But what I have found is you can take that same architectural concept, which is an invitation to go outside, and you can create it for yourself. So in my case, I stuck a hammock down in our orchard because our French doors lead out to a deck. The deck stops. You never think about, oh, there's a garden down underneath, right? If you can't see it, you don't go to it. And so what you have to do is you have to give yourself the cue, the excuse. The vegetable garden, you have to go water. The nice chair underneath the tree, the hammock, whatever it is, that thing that prompts the back of your mind, right, I'm gonna go outside. But it's the same architectural concept as a French door. It's just that we're doing the far less expensive version of it.
Great.
Erica, can you hear me?
I can. Hi, Alice.
For the scent keeper, did you start with the character of the young girl, or did you start with the concept of the scents?
That's a good question. It actually started with the idea of the sense of smell. I had written my second book, Joy for Beginners, has a character in it. Her name is Ava, and she's a perfume matcher. And so I did a lot. And what I mean by that is she's someone who would interview people and figure out who they were and match them with the perfume that would make them happy. And in order to write Ava's character, I did a lot of research into the biology of the sense of smell and the culture and the sociology. And I just loved it. It was fascinating. I mean, smell is the most subliminal of all the senses. It's the one we pay attention to the least. And so when I finished Joy for Beginners, I loved Ava's story, but the arc was done. I didn't need to go back to Ava. But I thought, I really want to write a whole book about the sense of smell. And I think what I'm most interested in is what would our world look like to a child who had been raised with smell as her dominant sense, her default sense. She's not blind, she just smells before she sees. And what would that be like? And so that idea sat in my head for years. You know, I wrote Lost Art of Mixing. I worked on yet another version of House Lessons that didn't go anywhere. I mean, you know, it was like 5 years playing with this idea in my head. And then one day I got this image of a little girl in a cabin. All the walls are lined with drawers, and in every drawer there's a different scent. And I thought, who is this marvelous creature? And why is she here? And who is she going to grow up to be? And I just wanted to spend time with her. So, you know, generally my books come from an idea and a character. It can't move forward without both of those things. And in that case, the character came second, but then she just dominated. Particularly once her first person voice, and that's the first book I'd ever written with a first person voice. Once she showed up talking, that was amazing. And I think writing her first person voice allowed me to go back and write House Lessons as myself, but using a first person voice. It was kind of the training wheels set for me to get me used to using I in a sentence.
Yeah.
Great. I did notice a comment of somebody saying they're absolutely loving this. So are there other questions? I'm gonna push my my cooking writing question a little bit further for you, Erica.
Go for it.
You actually talked about cooking as subject and content, but I think I was asking about method, and that is, how do you cook and how do you write, and are they similar?
So I cook very much the way the chef in School of Essential Ingredients cooks, which is without, I very rarely use recipes. If I do use a recipe, I tend to go on the internet and look at 4 of them and pick the parts I like and play with it. That comes from the 2 years that we lived in Italy, where I went from being a very recipe-based cook to being a very not recipe-based cook, and being very happy about that change. Because cooking without recipes feels more like poetry. And I love that. I love the instinct of it. I love the way you have to really pay attention to the food, and the smells of the spices become personalities that you're putting together in a conversation. And I think that the same thing does happen with writing. I think about how the characters go together with each other. You know, the word simmer comes up all the time when I'm talking about writing, because I always have the next book or 2 in the back of my head. You know, I had Emmeline from Scent Keeper in the back of my head for years, just kind of developing. And I think that that to me is a very organic way. I think I write very organically. The books end up being remarkably structured, but they don't start that way. And I think that's the odd thing about it, is I'm a very controlling person. And so that within this structure of either interconnected short stories or a character arc, I'm in charge of that part. I'm in charge of the parameters, you know, of which story goes in which order. But within the stories, that's the character. And that is very much like cooking, because you can be in charge of what you're aiming for, but the ingredients are in charge of what you get.
So what is your next book, or what are your next books that are simmering?
Well, I was working on a dark, snarky, feminist serial killer thriller. This was last year. At that point, Scent Keeper was not selling at all, like dead in the water. And so I thought, I got nothing to lose. Now's the time to write a dark, snarky feminist thriller under a pen name. What would Erica Stone write? You know, and so Erica Stone was having a blast. She got a little stuck. And then this strange thing happened this February, which is that Reese Witherspoon chose The Scent Keeper for Reese's book club. And suddenly the book that no one had read became the book that everyone was reading. And my agent said, Erica Bauermeister, now is not the time to write a dark, snarky, feminist serial thriller killer book under a pen name, because you, for the first time in your career, have name recognition. So you need to write an Erica Bauermeister book. And I said, okay, I'm not sure I know what that is, but we will give it a shot. So I'm a little superstitious about telling people what I'm working on, because sometimes it doesn't work out.
Okay.
Serial killer thriller is in a drawer. Jane may still come back. But I can't tell you that what I'm working on, I started before the pandemic. It has only become more relevant, I think, since. And the book circles around this concept of how differently we all can interpret the same thing, which is something I just see happening more and more and more. And it breaks my heart. And so I would really like a book that allows people to think about that in a safe place, and open their minds a bit to the potential of seeing what other people are thinking. And it's going to be interconnected short stories again. So there we go.
Okay.
I will add an anecdote, and that is that when Alice first suggested that you come up to the San Juan Island Library and do a reading there, that very next week, the Costco sent out their little magazine, and there you were, featured as the feature writer there. And I thought, well, actually, I think the fates must be with us. So we got there eventually.
It ended up being a really good 12 months. I mean, between Costco and Reese, those are two things that, you know, it's kind of like winning the lottery. So, you know, and that's the thing that's really was so interesting about Reese choosing The Scent Keeper, which is that she tends to choose books as they're being published, as they're coming out. And we don't really know how she got Scent Keeper. I mean, we know that obviously every publisher sends every book by every female author to Hello Sunshine, which is Reese's company. But how my book made it through all those thousands of titles to get to her eyes and for her to choose it when the book had been out for 8 months and was not selling. And I think that's credit to her for taking that risk. She's taking her celebrity and she is creating a market for women authors. She is creating characters for actors, women actresses to play. And I think that's a good honor. You know, I mean, we need to stop waiting for doors to be open for us and start making the doors ourselves. And she is doing a fabulous job at that. And I'm really, really pleased. Also, for me, there was a beautiful symmetry, considering that my first book was 500 Great Books by Women, which was an attempt to get more women's stories out there, to be chosen by someone who's actively doing that in the area of movies and films and books was fabulous.
Great. And I hope you're following the chat box. There's some very interesting comments about cooking, and looking forward to your new book and talking about their house and enjoying the insights that you've given in regard to their house.
And I want the recipe that says what, I want the apron that says what recipe. That's perfect. Yeah. Oh, and for the person that was saying movie material, Scent Keeper has, now I say this with the proviso that these things like have a 2% chance of working, but both Scent Keeper and School of Essential Ingredients have recently been optioned as potential production for TV series. So cross your fingers. This will be the 4th time for School of Essential Ingredients, which is why I say, you know, don't get too excited, but it's a nice step in the right direction. So.
And it would be a fabulous movie.
Well, and I love the idea ever since, they first, and this really dates me, but, when School of Essential Ingredients came out, people were saying, oh, that'd be tough as a movie. And I said, yeah, but it'd be great and they were miniseries back then, right? I mean, that's how, it's been 10 years. That's how fast things have changed. But now all of a sudden what people want is content, and interconnected short stories fits perfectly for what we're doing right now. So, I look kind of prescient, but I really wasn't. I was just writing what I knew how to write.
Well, we could go on all evening, but I'm not seeing any more questions. And Erica, I wanted to thank you so much
Sure.
for doing this. This is just fantastic conversation. I just love what you've written and read out loud to us, and I really appreciate this conversation. So
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, and I just want to say one thing. The person who talked about titles, I just want you to know that authors are almost never in charge of the titles or the covers of their books. So if you don't like the title or the cover, please don't blame us. You have to open to the first page, and that's where you actually meet the author. I fight very, very hard for my titles and my covers, but I never have, almost no authors have veto power over what their covers look like. So you should see some of the early versions. It's crazy.
Your cover for House Lessons is wonderful.
And it's the 4th version. It took us 4 versions to get that one. And now they're talking about changing it for the paperback. So we're back to the drawing board.
I'd like to make a final plug for our local bookstores, Griffin Bay Bookstore in Friday Harbor, Darville's in East Sound. And I also will say, I believe we have all of your novels and maybe all of your books here at the library. Library's not open, but you can put them on hold and do curbside pickup. So those are available also. And I think some of them are available digitally also. So there are lots of ways you can get Erica's books, and I encourage you to do so.
Terrific. Thank you. And thank you all for coming and spending the evening here. This is a great way. Again, someday, I swear, we're going to do this on San Juan, or Lopez, or Orcas, or all of them. It works for me.
Great.
Thank you.
We'll all go to Port Townsend.
There you go.